Hi, this is Jess, and I'm going to talk a little bit about checklists. The Mills text didn't have any specific information on checklists themselves, so I only really used the Mills for when looking into reliability and validity and triangulation and things like that. I used chapter 5 from the Myrtle text. I used that one that had some stuff about checklists. And then I also found another source that was called A Short Guide to Action Research by Andrew Johnson. And that was 2012 when it was published. All right, so checklist. I would describe this as a list of behaviors, characteristics, skills, or other entities that uses a dichotomous set of response options. So it's a set of items that can be measured as present, not present, observed, not observed, yes or no, accomplished, not accomplished, done, not done. Then, after I looked more into the text by Andrew Johnson, he described kind of 4 different types of checklists. So one was student checklists, where you give the students a list of items and they either get to mark off if they're done or maybe how many times they've done them. Then you have teacher checklist, where that's the teacher kind of doing the same thing and observing students' behaviors or student skills. Then you have open-ended checklist. Johnson kind of described this as a list of items, and it would leave space for students to kind of give their definition of the item or what they think the item means. And then that would allow the teacher to see what a student knows or how much they know on a topic. And then lastly, he talked about rating checklists. So these are checklists that actually provide rating skills kind of above them. So I gave an example there that he used. So 3 would be very much. So how often do you see the behavior? Very much. And then instead of using checks or tallies, you would actually use those numbers to indicate how often you saw that behavior or how much you saw that skill. And that's just an example there at the bottom. So I thought that was really interesting because the chapter 5 by Myrtle didn't really talk about the last 2 very much. What processes and procedures are unique to this technique? It is a quick way to collect data, but in order to keep it manageable, you need to make sure that the list of items is not too many to observe or for you to record in a single session. So you need to make sure the characteristics are simplified so that it's not too much for you. And then it can be set up for like an individual student. Like you could have a checklist, the same checklist for each individual student, or you could kind of create it into a list where all the students are together on one. The items can either be checked off with a check mark or a marking, or it could be marked like tallies, like how many times you saw it. So you could tally every time you saw a behavior, you saw a student using a certain technique. It is a quantitative data collection technique. And I kind of gave an example there because to me it was like a little bit hard for me to think about it because it was something that I observed. But you can quantify the data. So, for example, I just kind of gave one here. It says like 75% of students were prepared for class with a notebook and pencil. So that would be based off a checklist that said, prepared for class with a notebook, with a pencil, and you could just mark very easily if the student came with both of those items, and then quantify that information. What types of questions would this technique be best for? It would be best for observable behaviors, work readiness, and cognitive strategies. So I kind of gave examples of all of those there, just to kind of lay it out. So an observable behavior could be the student was sitting straight in their seat. They took notes on the materials presented. Work readiness could be, they came to class with a notebook, pencil, agenda, etc. Cognitive strategies is what might be a little bit trickier in making sure it's like a definite yes or no. So I wrote predicted what would come next in the story. So Maybe the student had to physically make a prediction and tell you that prediction out loud. Did they do that? Did they not do that? It all needs to be clearly observed or not observed. What are some of the strengths of this data collection technique, and what are some of the weaknesses? So a big strength is it's quick, and then it's also, you can use it, the teacher can use it, and the students can use it, and you can kind of collect different data that way. One of the weaknesses, it doesn't provide too much detail. There's usually no continuum, so it's not necessarily a rating scale or a survey, and it doesn't allow too much detail to it. Now, the way Johnson described it, some of those checklists he had listed did provide more detail with a specific type of rating scale or with the open-ended checklist. There must be and should be triangulation. I should say should, not must. There should be triangulation or a multi-instrumental approach, as Mill describes on page 139 and 140. I thought the matrix example on page 140 was really helpful in understanding and preparing to collect data in my own research. I thought that was kind of a cool way for me to think about, okay, what are, the certain type of ways I want to collect data, and then how did that kind of hit all of the aspects of my research question or questions? What concerns do you have about this? For the validity, you need to make sure that the items on the checklist or the content, as it could be described, should be directly related to the characteristic that's being measured. So we don't want to just, have a checklist on if a student brought a pencil to class if I'm trying to figure out if my math groups and my ability groupings are benefiting students. Them bringing a pencil to class doesn't directly relate to if my group is working. And then the reliability, items on the checklist should be measured by yes or no, observed, not observed, etc. And that's going to help you produce a more consistent scale. You need to make sure that the items are not subjective, that you have on there. And then ethical perspectives, I was just thinking that you need to make sure student's name or any identifying information should be taken off. Something specific, I know just a couple of our kids at our school come and get a breakfast and then bring it to the room and eat breakfast. So you wouldn't want to do anything that maybe had that information on it, because that would identify which a couple of those students it could be. And then whenever I think of this, I try to think of the saying that a valid item is always reliable, but a reliable test is not necessarily always valid. Here are some of the sources. Like I said, I used the Johnson text, a short guide to action research, and then I did use the Mills, and then chapter 5 a little bit, and then I found a little bit of information on this YouTube video. Thanks so much.